Well, it's fantastic. I mean, I think to be able to continue to be part of an EU program, given the difficulties that Brexit in particular has given us, is just very heartening and pleasing, to be honest. I have always particularly enjoyed EU programs, and I mean FEMaLe in particular, because of the diversity of research that goes on in an EU consortium, and the opportunities to sort of meet new people and existing collaborators, of course, and work together, around common goals. But particularly the variety, I think, of the research that is brought together in a consortium, which is really fantastic and really stimulating. I mean, within Oxford, we are extremely keen for innovation that comes out of research to be utilised clearly for the benefit of people's health and in particularly future health. So we have various structures here within Oxford. A particular centre that looks at how innovation could be utilised and could be commercialised, if that's the best road to follow. We have a very active tech transfer office where findings that come out of any project, including EU projects, can be further developed, essentially, for the benefit of patients. And I think in particular in a FEMaLe project, there hopefully will be a number of potential avenues which we can follow in that sense. Oxford and this goes in the same way for other universities. We're really extremely keen for science to be clearly communicated to the public in a very accessible way, and also for any results that come out of what we do to be as open access as possible. We have essentially a mandate from within the university where publications that come out are archived as soon as they are accepted for publication, not even when they come out, but when they're accepted for publication, so they're accessible straight away. We promote open access once the publications are out, and as researchers, we have an obligation to to the public to do this, and I personally very strongly, I very strongly support this as well. That's on the sort of scientific side, but clearly there's a real obligation we have to communicate our results to the public, because ultimately it's the public that that funds us, that funds the science that we do. We in the various departments within Oxford, we have various ways of conducting outreach programs where we communicate our results to the public. And that's a little bit project dependent as well, and it clearly also involves all types of different stakeholders, going from policymakers to people who have the particular condition that you might be studying, etc. So quite often the outreach programs are quite bespoke in terms of how we do things and how we try and relate things to the public. And then of course there's the sort of social media element to it as well. I mean, within FEMaLe, I mean, I don't think I've ever been part of a project that has been so successful and so wonderful in outreach when it comes through the social media aspects, and thank you for that. The various sort of methods of outreach that we have, are the vehicle to do this. So again, social media is important. Continuing communication with stakeholders where our research is concerned is important. Active communication with policy holders, for example, interaction with government, and we have in the UK. Last summer was the UK, the government for England launched a new women's health strategy. Endometriosis is mentioned as one of the key areas, of priority areas in that strategy. So again, engagement of what we do in our research, communication of that with stakeholders within a sort of policy environment is really important, and that's what we try and do as much as possible. So we have a, as I mentioned before, we have an infrastructure here where results from research that are commercially exploitable, are commercially viable, through the structures that we have can be helped to grow, if we want for a better term. So we have Oxford University Innovation as a centre. We have also Oxford Science Innovation, where investors that may be interested in investing in startup companies, for example, that are based on some of the findings in Oxford, and of those, of course, with collaborators, can be further developed, essentially. So that's a very well-oiled machine, and once from any research project, there's some valuable results that come out that we think are should be commercially, commercialized, essentially. Then we go to these centres, and they help us develop this further. And of course, that's with all collaborators that are participating on these projects as well. Oxford aims to promote gender equality through a number of different ways. First of all, of course, through the research that we do, promoting sort of research programs that also in the social sciences, where the topic of gender equality is investigated, and to what extent that can be improved, across various domains, in terms of health, in terms of community, in terms of quality of life. I think, as I mentioned, on the sort of health and disease part, as I mentioned, here in England, we've recently had a new women's health strategy. It is pretty stark if you look at the statistics mentioned in there, what the extent of the inequality, is, even just in the UK, when you consider women's health versus versus men's health, excess morbidity, excess mortality, and this is through the life course, essentially. So that clearly needs to be tackled, and it's an area that, of course, as a department where that I head, so women's reproductive health, that's at the forefront of our minds when we do our research, and of course what we do in FEMaLe fits exactly within that. On another level, Oxford's very keen to promote gender equality for our staff and our students. So there clearly is, and as I think can be seen in other institutions as well, still inequality when it comes to pay, when it comes to perhaps certain promotion opportunities. This is without Oxford's control, but if you look at the statistics for success in grant applications, there is clear gender equality there, gender inequality there. So I think these are, and the various funding bodies are aware of that, Wellcome Trust, MRC, etc., and everyone is trying to tackle that, in their own way. But I think being aware of this and trying to come up with ways of addressing this is important, and it's very much at the forefront of Oxford's mind. it's one of the things that, again, I talked about the evidence that is presented in a women's health strategy. It's one of the stark comments that are made. Historically, most of the research that has resulted in certain treatments for common conditions or certain ways of diagnosing, historically, that they have been done on men rather than women. And we know for a fact that certain treatments work. For example, cardiovascular disease is that they work much less in some women than they do in men. And it goes even deeper than that. So if you go to the lab science, and for example, animal experiments that happened in the past, even for conditions that would seem to be, related to women, they use male animal models because they seem to be simpler, and they don't have to be account for the hormonal system that is. So this is, this has been intrinsic, for a very long time. Now, having said all that, there's now quite a considerable realization that this is something that needs to change. So I think a lot of people are working together to fix this, including funding bodies actually, and demanding for for this to be changed. Well, first and foremost, endometriosis has been my passion to research for decades now, and any program, and FEMaLe is a beautiful example of it, that tries to bring together people, researchers, fantastic researchers across Europe, working together on improving diagnosis of endometriosis, because that's what the FEMaLe is all about. In different ways, using different disciplines, using our different skill sets and knowledge bases. I mean, it's a total no-brainer for me. It's I would absolutely want to be part of that and love to be part of that. Yeah, that's an obvious reason for me. So I'm together with Meda Nygaard. We lead Work Package 4. Work Package 4 is all about trying to leverage genetics to find certain subtypes of endometriosis that might benefit from different ways of diagnosing, or even different ways of treating. And we work together with Precision Life, a really wonderful company who have created a sort of a new method to try and identify these sort of clusters of genetic variants, in a different sort of computational way to identify these clusters. Now, that's brilliant, and we're sort of very much in the midst of sort of data generation, and some of the results look really, really intriguing and interesting. So a responsibility for Oxford is to try and see if these kind of clusters can be mapped to specific clinically defined sort of subtypes. So, would, for example, a cluster that is identified relate to women who have a particular type of endometriosis, for example, ovarian endometriosis? We know from some of the genetic work that we've done with other collaborators, and it included Meda Nygaard as well and her team. We know that ovarian endometriosis seem to be differently genetically driven than other types of endometriosis. So the question is, is that sort of identified or crystallized by these clusters that are identified through the mathematical modeling that Precision Life does? But that's sort of almost at a visual surgical level. The other question is, can those clusters define subsets of women who experience certain symptoms, in terms of pelvic pain, or even sort of infertility? Can we do better in identifying these subtypes? And that will be really beneficial if we can. That would be really beneficial for future development of both diagnostic methods, but also treatments. So we think that a little bit like, I mean, we always use the analogy with cancer. I mean, it's very important to say endometriosis is not cancer, clearly, but it displays certain characteristics that remind us of cancer in terms of its growth, tissue being in the wrong place, etc. Concurrent inflammation, etc. So within the cancer field, huge progress has been made to identify subtypes of cancer that benefit from totally different types of treatment, and have very different, more optimal success, for specific treatments. And we think that endometriosis would probably benefit from a similar approach. So if we identify these subtypes, and develop more targeted treatments that will improve, hopefully, the treatment options that women have, and with a particular focus on non-hormonal treatments, of course. I mean, at the moment, the treatments that are available for endometriosis are mainly sort of surgical, repeated removal of these lesions, or hormonal treatments. And really, I mean, it's very clear what women tell us with endometriosis. They really want us to move away from those options. Well, I think success for me, has, I mean, that has many levels. So first of all, of course, we're talking about success in terms of the research results that we get. And we've just published a very large genome-wide association analysis with many collaborators, including Meda, and she was very much part of that core analysis team with her group. And that related to sort of variant by variant analysis of association. What we're trying to do with FEMaLe is go beyond that, is go further than that. So we try and identify, rather than sort of variant by variant basis, we try and identify clusters that are essentially working together to co-regulate or to co-cause certain types of endometriosis. But the paper that we've just published has formed a very good basis for that, because it's increased about fourfold the number of reasons in the genome we now know are associated with endometriosis. So we can work with that, and Precision Life can work with that to improve their sort of ways of identifying clusters and their models. So if we are able to identify these clusters that are clinically meaningful in terms of identifying certain subtypes of endometriosis, then that would be fantastic, and I think that would be a really groundbreaking result from the program that we do. I think even, and this is where I say, this question has many dimensions. Even our ability to explore this question together and see to what extent these mathematical models could be perhaps improved upon, to come to improved clustering of patients. Even if that doesn't work for endometriosis, it might well work for other conditions. So there's always added value of what you do methodologically in a particular project, that hopefully has value in other conditions. So there's that part, then that relates to the results that we produce, and fingers crossed that would look good, but we're still very much in the midst of those analyses, and we're looking forward to showing some of the interim results at the World Congress of Endometriosis next month. But there's another dimension to it, which is what you alluded to. Peter is bringing together a group of scientists who brainstorm around a particular theme and a particular topic, which brings huge added value. So other than the work packages that we're all working on within FEMaLe, getting us together, as part of the World Congress in Edinburgh, we have a whole day where we can brainstorm together thinking about new plans, improvements we can make, new ideas, has huge added value. And that's what sort of brings out our next ideas for, next grants that we might write together, our next avenues. Research is, science is a hit and miss game, and we have positive findings, hopefully, a lot of the time, but we also learn from the things that don't work, and then come up with plans to improve upon what we do. And that's just how you build progress, basically. So again, doing this as part of this huge consortium with so many amazing scientists and people with amazing areas of expertise, it's just a real privilege, and for me that's a huge added value as well.
Well, in multiple ways, I would say. First of all, to start with, as a researcher, I'm also learning a lot from FEMaLe. We're collaborating with a industry partner, Precision Life. So it's very interesting to know about their algorithms and how with academia that is working. So I think there is definitely a learning perspective. That's a success to start with. But more of a milestone success, I guess, we have recently published our genetic findings for endometriosis in Nature Genetics in March 2023. And this has been a humongous work effort, basically, from FEMaLe partners and other global partners, where we mapped basically all the common genetic variants associated with endometriosis in more than 60,000 endometriosis cases and 600 controls. To put it very simply, what we've done was basically compare the frequency of these genetic variants between endometriosis and control groups. And by doing that, we are able to map which variants on the genome it is that make these women more susceptible to have endometriosis. So we've ended up identifying 42 such genetic variants associated with endometriosis. But more than that, what this study aimed to do, which is also part of FEMaLe aims, is to try and identify whether there are subtypes of endometriosis. So endometriosis is a heterogeneous condition, and we think that there are subtypes to this condition. So what we were able to do is show that, for example, ovarian endometriosis has a different genetic architecture compared to peritoneal endometriosis. So it's a great milestone that sets the first example of actually we are able to identify genetic subtypes of this very complex condition. So if you look at other common complex condition, endometriosis has been very much under studied. So having 60,000 endometriosis cases in a gene mapping study sounds great. It is amazing, but we should be really pushing these sample sizes to hundreds of thousands to be able to identify all the genetic variants that make women susceptible to endometriosis. And that will in turn help us stratify patients into subgroups and say that an individual with this genetic makeup is likely to have this subtype of endometriosis, or their disease prognosis would be in this way, or they would benefit better from these treatments versus the others based on their genetic makeup. So these studies are contributing to that end goal, but it is still early days to translate these to clinic. So we still need to do a lot more work to identify the remaining genetic variants for this condition.
That's always a tricky question from a person to ask, because it's usually, I think I'm Dutch originally, but I've become quite British because I've lived here now for longer than than I have in Holland. So we would sort of say, well, people have to say what added value I bring to this, rather than me trying to define that. what I hope to bring is, you know, our group's knowledge of genetics, our group's knowledge of endometriosis and the biology, you know, around endometriosis, and our particular lens, which has been an epidemiological lens, a genetic epidemiological lens. So looking at the issue from a sort of population perspective, what can we actually, you know, how do we identify these risk variants? What do they mean at a population level? What do they mean in terms of the biology? And I think trying to integrate some of that knowledge with what's happening in other work packages. There's clear synergies already. I mean, we work with work package 3, which is all about epidemiology of endometriosis, you know, subtyping is a theme that's clearly you know, important in female, and that's what we're all sort of looking at from different angles as well. So, you know, I'm hoping that my team's expertise is what we bring and brings added value. The biggest pain point, well, there's two big ones really, and I think probably anyone who either suffers from endometriosis or who works in endometriosis will probably give you the same answer, which is that at the moment we don't have a non-invasive diagnostic method that allows fast diagnosis of women, which is the main reason why this diagnostic delay still exists of many years on average. And to be able to diagnose endometriosis through a non-surgical method, say a blood test or you know, something like that, or imaging, will be hugely valuable. So you know, that is that's really important. And the other part clearly is treatment. So treatment's currently limited to surgery and hormonal treatments, and it's very clear that women want something different. Particularly the hormonal treatment is an issue, because of course many women actually, you know, want to conceive. They're in that age group, and hormonal treatments can only be used for a short period of time if you're you know, if you're wanting to have a baby. So having new treatments that are much more targeted to specific types of disease, and for those to be non-hormonal is really important. So those are both the pain points, and where we can gain, basically.
In my perspective, the biggest problem with endometriosis currently is that not all endometriosis is the same. So we're talking about a very complex and heterogeneous condition. And we don't yet understand whether there are multiple subtypes of this condition. Currently, we're amalgamating everything into endometriosis. And what we really need to understand is these subtypes, so we can provide more precise treatment options for patients. So to give an example to that, is, for example, a patient who goes through laparoscopic surgery, we might end up seeing very extensive disease in the pelvic cavity. However, if you look at the symptomology that the patient presents to clinic, they may not report, for example, severe chronic pelvic pain, or vice versa could happen. Someone comes to clinic with severe, you know, pelvic pain, but during laparoscopy, very mild or limited disease is found in the pelvic cavity. So really, symptoms and visualization of the disease in the pelvis, for example, do not correlate, which already highlights to the fact that we need to better understand and define and characterize this condition, so we can start stratifying patients into these subgroups. So I think that's the biggest problem currently, that we're putting everyone in one basket. To be able to answer the question of whether endometriosis is one condition or whether it has subtypes, what we really need is big data sets which are very well characterized in terms of patient symptomology, disease presentation, and this should be done in a systematic manner. And there's been an effort to harmonize the phenotypic and sample collection for endometriosis, which is called the Endometriosis Phenome Harmonization Project, so EFECT. So within FEMaLe, and in particular in the work package that I am part of, work package 4, we are utilizing multiple omics data. So that's genomic data in combination with metabolomic data, proteomic data, but also phenotypic data. So phenotypic data is basically the patient characteristics and the symptomology. And we've been utilizing these EFECT questionnaires to characterize patients. And that allows us to actually collaborate with centers who also collect data in the same manner. So we can reach larger sample sizes with well-characterized patient cohorts. So I guess to answer this question, the biggest gain is I think now we're starting to accumulate this level of detailed and standardized data in endometriosis patient groups. And within our work package, we are utilizing this level of data to model this disease and try and predict these subgroups of endometriosis patients. So it's exciting to be able to have this data to try and start to look into these questions. So I think that's the biggest gain. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, there has to be more funding for women's health, and that's clear. I mean, there's been we've often quoted statistics from funding bodies. I mean, the ones that are more to the front of our mind is the statistics from the US, but you know, I've no doubt that things look similar in the UK or across Europe. In that, for example, and people get quite shocked when they understand this. The NIH, for example, spent about 30 times more on research funding for diabetes than they do for endometriosis. And they are conditions that are equally common. They're actually also quite similar in terms of economic impact and therefore sort of societal impact. So that's just as an illustration. I mean, that's not singling out any particular funding body, but that's just as an illustration of what we, you know, have dealt with just endometriosis alone, let alone the rest of women's health, you know, over the years. So more funding needs to be to come available. There's always, of course, this is tricky politically because, you know, the budget is only so large as the governments can give. So there probably has to be some rebalancing, you know, of how funding is awarded. And I'm hopeful that, you know, in the UK, but particularly outside the UK as well, that these new drives to focus on women's health, that some of that rebalancing will actually happen. I think that's really important. What's crucial is that those who are in the decision-making seat are aware of how large the problems are, and that involves lobbying, that involves you know, raising awareness, etc. And there's small steps, but I think on the awareness front, I think we've already come a long way, even in the last sort of 5 years, from my perspective. You know, just again, endometriosis as a specific example, because of course that's why we're here and why we're talking. You know, when I started working on endometriosis 20 years ago, few people had heard of the condition, and that's men and women, because it wasn't really much talked about, and there's still probably some sort of taboo around the symptoms, you know, that women experience, and around menstruation, etc. All of that has changed a lot. At least it has changed for us in certain countries, and perhaps not. You know, I think there's a lot more work to be done globally, but we're on a good path, I think. And now that has to be translated into more research funding and more dedicated research funding for women's health in general, I think.
So, I mean, there is a big research gap in women's health research. I think a year and a half ago in England, there was a policy paper that was published that's on women's health strategy for England. And there, endometriosis was highlighted, and the fact that it has been a very under-investigated condition. Given how common endometriosis is, affecting 1 in 10 women within the reproductive age range, I think, and given the level of knowledge we have and no cure or non-invasive diagnostic tool for this condition, I would definitely prioritize these women's health conditions, such as endometriosis being the top, possibly, that affect women's life severely without any proper treatment or diagnostic tools. So I think we really need more research funding going into understanding this disease, so we can actually start developing non-invasive diagnostic markers, stratifying patients into subgroups, and to be able to provide non-hormonal drug treatment targets as treatment options. We will see. Obviously, we are again kind of limited with the data in hand most of the time with endometriosis research. That's why it's very important that we get more research money into endometriosis, because we've got the tools, but we really need the data to be there to be able to answer these questions.